Everyone wants to live an inspired life, yet so many people search for happiness following the footsteps of peers and taking advice from people who have different values and outcomes to which they're searching. There are people born into wealth, graduated from the best universities in the world, and there are people who have none of that and yet are living extraordinary lives full of fulfillment and reward. The purpose of this podcast is to share insights and strategies that allow you to question the status quo and think freely, so you can design your life and be who you want to be. We get one life. Time is our most valuable asset. I believe that when we're free and able to focus on meaningful work, we become better human beings. This is Always Free, and I'm your host, Jason Graystone.
Welcome to the leading podcast for financial empowerment and wealth creation. Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can connect with Jason on social media and subscribe to the Jason Graystone YouTube channel for weekly videos. Don't forget to also subscribe to the weekly newsletter to receive frequent educational content and action steps to help you design your life so you can be who you want to be. For news on all future events and updates, go to jasongraystone.com.
Well, welcome back to the podcast, guys. If you're listening for the first time, welcome. This is the number one podcast for financial empowerment and wealth creation. And if this is the first ever episode you've listened to because you found me from external recommendations and resources, then I highly recommend that you go back to episode 1. You're going to get the most out of this podcast if you start there, particularly if you go through the first 25 episodes in order, because there really is a strategy to this. So this week, what I wanted to talk about is, this is a wealth creation podcast. We're in December. What a year it's been. The rug has been pulled from beneath many people's feet, or if not, it's opened everyone's eyes as to how easily the rug can be pulled from beneath your feet. And we're coming up to Christmas, and people are trying to really make sure that they make the best of planning 2021 and really kind of getting back on track, or ensuring that they hit the ground running in 2021. And with Christmas coming up, what I thought would be a good idea to do in this episode is to go over some book recommendations that have had the most kind of long-lasting impact in my life, played the most kind of pivotal role in my wealth creation and financial freedom journey, and also just the books that are kind of most responsible for being behind almost the theme and thread of everything that I talk about. Okay, so before I get into those, and the reason I wanted to do this now is so that you can kind of add some of these to your Christmas list. Maybe if anyone's asking you what you want, you can tell them to buy you a book, or you can go and add these to your list and buy them for yourself. Treat yourself. You deserve it after this year. If you're still standing after this year, you've done all right. But look, I want to give you 5 books. But before I get into that, I want to just kind of reiterate or kind of reinforce the power of books. Because when you look at these books, it's a little A5 document, 250 pages, 300 pages long, and that has essentially been about at least 10,000 hours of someone's expertise put into a book that's usually taken years to write into a book form to then deliver to you and give you as a gift. And it's almost like you freeze frame 10,000 hours plus, sometimes 30,000 hours plus of experience and expertise of the greatest minds on the planet into 5.5 hours or 6 hours or however long it will take you to read the book, right? And that is incredible. You are literally able to go and download someone's life's work in 5.5 hours. And you can't underestimate the power of that. And I was talking the other day about kind of the speed in which we're learning these days, and it's kind of constant. We're able to learn at the touch of our fingertips and the click of a mouse, and we can get any answer we want. Now, there's also a problem with that because there's lots of conspiracy theories and there's lots of fake news and all the rest of it. And it's hard to kind of know what to listen to and what not to listen to. And Always Free is always about questioning everything, aligning it with your values and making sure that it's sound information based on where you want to go in your life, and kind of taking pinch of salt advice from anyone else. And books are a great way to make sure that you're getting sound information, because they take a tremendous amount of effort to write. And some of the books, what I like to do is study the greats, and if I get a mentor, I ask who they learnt from, and I'm interested in learning who they learnt from, because the more the more it's passed down, the more it can be a little bit diluted. So books are a great way of finding the source of the information, and I'm going to share with you some of the best books that have had the biggest impact in my life. And I'm going to share them in the order in which of my journey, really, in the order in which I read them. And you're going to see that it will kind of all play into the whole mindset first, then your personal finances, then taking a look at the longer term plan, then kind of building and earning your right to risk and delegation and freeing up your time. And it will, if you just read the books that I'm going to share with you in this podcast in order, you're going to have an unfair advantage on the mass population. So the first book that I want to recommend is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. This is probably the first, other than kind of stealing Richard Branson books from the library when I was at school, because he was a bit of a hero of mine. This was the first self-help book that I really read front to back when I was about 22 years old. And when I read it, it made me think in terms of what was possible. Okay, so Napoleon Hill was a guy that had dedicated his life to studying the most successful people on the planet, and he essentially wrote into a book almost like a formula, 13-step formula to help you think longer term, and really just open my eyes that you can have whatever you want in life. It's a decision that you make in you to choose whether to go after it or not. And this book really played a part in me thinking different, literally like the title, right? Think and Grow Rich. And after I read it wasn't really about the rich part. It was more to do with just being rich in life, not in terms of money, but just being rich in life, rich in experience, and just being a controller and a master of your destiny, choosing how you spend each day, choosing your future. And that really, really that was kind of a turning point in the road for me early on. And it was very shortly after reading that book that I decided that now was the time to start my own business. And if you've listened to the podcast, you would have heard that whole story when I was, sitting there wrapping Christmas presents, and it was Christmas time. We just had having our first son. We just moved into a bigger house and all the rest of it. And that book really just gave me the kick up the butt. It was the affirmation that I needed to really just get it done and become a driver instead of being a passenger. So that was the first book. The next book that I read, which kind of played off of the first one, was more about personal finance, and I got recommended a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. Now, The Richest Man in Babylon is an extremely old book. Okay, it's old book. It's written in kind of old English, and the principles. It's kind of a story. And the principles in that book, if you go and listen to my podcast and you listen to that book, many of the principles that I talk about in my podcast, many of the principles I talk about in my newsletter and my programs are still sound with the teachings in that book. It really talks about controlling your personal finances, living within your means, but scaling and having anything that you want if you grow the right way and if you manage your money the right way. And after reading that book, it really opened my eyes to kind of the power of controlling your lifestyle and having the discipline to control your lifestyle and delaying gratification, and knowing that if you abide by a certain set of rules with the right mindset, the things that you want in life are inevitable. You can't not get the things that you want in life if you follow those rules. And there was obviously there's a couple of outdated principles in it, now that I kind of synthesized and I kind of weighed up the paradox and thought, well, actually I prefer this approach, and there's a couple of, to do with property and things like that. But other than that, the book is absolutely gold. It is gold, literally. So, Richest Man in Babylon, if you've not read that book, I highly recommend you go and grab that book. The next book that really kind of changed the game for me was a book called The Intelligent Investor. And this book was kind of, as I was starting to control my personal finances, I wanted to start growing the money and growing the savings and putting my money to use. And in The Richest Man in Babylon, it talks about putting your coin out to earn more money. And Intelligent Investor was my kind of newer age way of understanding the best way to do that at a lower level of risk. So I was kind of going in, not gambling, not speculating, but value investing. And I wanted to understand the markets. I wanted to understand how I could start to put my money to use to outperform inflation and things like that. And I thought, well, Warren Buffett is one of the greatest alive. Who's his mentor? So again, practice what I preach, sharing you with my mentors. I asked the people, who did they learn from? And Warren Buffett's mentor was a guy called Benjamin Graham. And Benjamin Graham wrote The Intelligent Investor. And Benjamin Graham's the guy that kind of said, pick your stocks like groceries, not perfume. He said, be fearful when others are greedy, greedy when others are fearful. He also said that the market is a manic depressive. All these kind of quotes came from Benjamin Graham. And when I read The Intelligent Investor, it really allowed me to think long term. Okay, so what I'd read in Think and Grow Rich, what I had applied from Richest Man in Babylon, Intelligent Investor was really what allowed me to think in terms of legacy. And it also taught me how to remain poised. I would say after reading that book, that's where most of my emotional mastery started to take place, because I was seeing the market for what it was, just doing its thing. And I was seeing the booms and the busts, and I was seeing them as the same thing. And it allowed me to remain poised, very, very objective in my approach to investing. And it allowed me now, to see things like just what's happened now with COVID. People are worried about the crash. People are worried that we're in a bear market and all this kind of thing. Well, it makes no difference to me. All it does is it makes me see that it's, there's unjustified pessimism going on. And I want to look at the average growth of the market whilst everyone's worrying and screaming and running around. I'm looking long term, and the Intelligent Investor and learning about the Graham number, it also taught me how to understand income statements, cash flow statements, balance sheets and all the rest of it, and paint a picture of a company based on qualitative and quantitative analysis. It really allowed me to take my approach to and knowledge of business and investing and valuable companies and understanding when they're undervalued to another level. It kind of set the benchmark for me as an investor. The next book was When I Was in Business. Okay, so the next book, I was investing, I was in business, and the book that kind of allowed me to start focusing on delegation and freeing up my time was a book called The E-Myth, okay, by Michael E. Gerber. And many of you guys, I'm sure, have heard of Michael E. Gerber. There's a book called The E-Myth, and the book is essentially about business systems, okay? And I've often spoken about my life. I see it like a game of Tetris, right? When you've got like the limited capacity in the Tetris kind of bucket, and a big old clunky shape drops in through the top, and you kind of have to make it fit and pack it into the corner as efficiently as possible, and then you can focus on the next thing, and you introduce the next thing, and then you have to kind of pack that thing and make it efficient. I've always gone about making any business that I create, first of all, mobile, because if you can make it mobile, you're liberated. and then making it passive, which means that you can free up more of your time. So not only can you do it from anywhere, but it also takes you less time. And if you have that objective in any business, that's really what financial freedom is. Being able to cover your living costs by being free. And if you're in business, the way to be free is to delegate, build systems, build automations, delegation of staff and team, how to put systems in place. And it was that book that really spurred me on to create systems. And now, today, if you look at any business I create, I come up with the idea, it's a little bit clunky, we get around a table, and from day one, we're building systems. Right now, the company, my Graystone Education company, is just over a year old, and we've got an entire dashboard of training, which means that any job or function in this business, we can bring someone on. We've got ways of training them up without me having to be there, without any of our team having to be there. They do a test, they do the training, and then they can do it. And then we've got systems on how to micromanage, and then how to promote, how to employ, how to do every single task in our business. And then once we've got all the tasks in the business, we then look at what we can automate, and we just chip through the automations until it is compact in that Tetris bucket, and we can bring in the next thing. So the E-Myth was responsible for allowing me to understand why most small businesses don't work, because most cap out, very small percentage of small businesses here in the UK barely reach the VAT threshold, let alone employ anyone. Okay, so like if you've got 3 employees, I think it puts you in a tiny percentage of businesses here in the UK, and I think about 5% of businesses employ more than 10 employees. So if you've got more than 10 employees, well done. But to get to that point, most people don't put systems in place, which is why they never get there, and they end up frustrated. They end up hating their work instead of loving their work, and it completely removes their chance of being free. So the E-Myth was definitely a life changer for me. All right. So moving on to kind of a newer age, there's some other books that I want to kind of go back to. When I was reading Think and Grow Rich, you might want to read another book called Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. Okay, that talks about long-term, not instant gratification, but the results of doing small changes over time, small improvements over time. There's also a book called The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Wattles, and there's also a book called The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. Kind of reading all those as well around that time. The Slight Edge was a later publication, but those kind of books, really, really good books. And another kind of new age classic is The Money Master the Game by Tony Robbins. That kind of puts into perspective the all-weather investing, kind of diversified investing. That's a great book. But I had to kind of cut it down to 5 of the best pivotal books in this particular podcast. And so far we've got Think and Grow Rich, Richest Man in Babylon, Intelligent Investor, The E-Myth, and the next one is Principles. Principles is written by a guy called Ray Dalio, who runs a company called Bridgewater Associates. And this book, for me, is where I really started focusing on excellence, okay? Where I kind of picked up the mantra, do your future self a favor, where I picked up the mantra, how you do anything is how you do everything, and really just focusing on excellence. There's many books that I read, like Tools of Titans and Good to Great, but this book made me think about building machines, building well-oiled machines. And kind of not settling for average, being absolutely excellent. And these principles that he lays out in his book, and it's kind of divided into 2, work principles and life principles. And every single principle in that book has just been, so powerful and so important in my life. I would say that is a book that you study for life. Even if you just open the first chapter in the book and you look at principle number 1 and it says, embrace reality and deal with it. Okay? You could literally spend a year just thinking about that and thinking, what does that actually mean for me? Embracing reality and dealing with it. What does that mean? This is a book that you can work through for your entire life. It is an absolutely fantastic book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. Highly recommend it. It's The Principles by Ray Dalio, and it also teaches you a lot about the markets, because his whole business is the financial markets. And then finally, I'm going to recommend my own book, Always Free. Although it's not out at the time of this recording, we're very close to the publication. So if you're not listening to this live and you're listening to this later on, look out for my book. It's going to be a synthesis of all of these books, plus many, many more. My life's work frozen into 5.5, 6 hours of reading. And I know if you've got value from this podcast, you're absolutely going to get value from that book. So please look out for that. And the link will be in the description if you're listening to this podcast later down the line when it's out. I look forward to receiving your reviews on that. Hopefully that's given you some ideas on what to get for Christmas, guys. If you've enjoyed this podcast, let me know. If you've got value from it, let me know. And next week we'll be back with another episode. Until then, have a great rest of your day and weekend, and I'll see you then.
Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. For news on all future events and updates, go to jasongraystone.com.